We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and pursue the truth with FBI whistleblowers and founding suspendables Garrett O'Boyle and Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast. On a Saturday, congratulations, everybody. You made it through the Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 grind. It's time to kick back, relax, and enjoy a Saturday grab bag edition of the American Radicals Podcast. Reminder, if you haven't already and you're watching us on rumble.com/amradpod, do give us a nice follow there, a thumbs up, a subscribe if your heart compels you to do that. If you watch us over on YouTube, the American Radicals Podcast, also give us a nice thumbs up, subscribe if you listen to the audio format of the show on iTunes, Spotify, iHeart. Make sure you give us a 5-star rating, a 5-star review. You can also check us out at X America News. Give us a share there. Do all the things. Tell a friend or 12. Try to expand the brand of this hobbyist podcast. It is, after all, a hobbyist podcast. I'm here as an American citizen only, not representing under any circumstances any particular arm, agency, department, bureau of the federal government of the United States of America, just offering my opinion on things that are open source, in the news, content worthy discussions to have. And we like to do that here as a hobby, as a matter of exercising our First Amendment. And what are we going to be talking about? It is the tradition like no other, the Saturday grab bag, where things might have eluded your attention throughout the week as you're focusing on the big stories as they come across your feed. And I try to catch the things, the scraps that might have slipped on past the goalie. And I caught a bunch this week. So what are we going to talk about? Well, we'll talk about how the media is now saying that groupthink is good and the Holocaust wasn't that bad. There are some rogue judges who are exerting control over our food stamps and White House press briefings. Now, a couple of state matters. Michigan is changing its sex ed curriculum. Massachusetts is data mining on its students in regards to the LGBTQAI plus 2S rainbow kamikaze. Illinois is legalizing assisted suicide. Kansans elected an illegal alien as a mayor. Ohio, politicians who are, as law enforcement professionals would know, domesticating with each other. Maine hospitals giving up primary care so that they can continue to murder babies through abortion. Some immigration judges are getting fired. Homelessness groups are running a giant scam, which we'll do a deep dive on. Black Lives Matter might be under continued investigation as the FBI and Department of Justice are now taking a look at that Marxist organization. The Trump administration has a different perspective on tariffs as it previously advertised. And we will conclude with a story about an Indian tribe that stole a man's airplane. So it is a Saturday grab bag all across a smorgasbord. We got a lot to get to, want to get to it all. And before we do, want to make sure we thank an underlying sponsor, affiliate of the American Radicals Podcast, because we don't take any money. We just like to support American businesses. So today we're going to be acknowledging the True Earth Pharmacy. TrueEarth.co is where you go. TrueEarth.co. You don't need the M. Don't get confused about the double E's in the middle of the URL. TrueEarth.co. Say you're interested in planting a garden. Maybe you have your own little farming property, a homestead you like to grow. Check out the squid extract that's available in the deep ocean powdered fertilizers section. And True Earth likes to use those very same fertilizers to grow their own supplements, which you can find in the pharmacy section. The pharmacy offers things like black turmeric, the turmeric trio. You have some mushroom extracts, some CBDs, even some stuff for your pets. So let's say you got some aches and pains, problems concentrating, problems relaxing. All of it can be addressed with a more natural remedy. And it won't break the bank. They're very reasonable. You can actually get a 10% discount if you use our proprietary code, which is AMRAD25, AMRAD25, because we are in November. It is still 2025. It's never too early to start getting healthy. Get 10% off at trueearth.co. Promo code is AMRAD25. All right, let's get to it. Let's get to the Saturday grab bag. And I don't know if you can hear it. You could hear it kind of creeping up on me on Thursday when I interviewed Professor Nicholas Giordano. The RFK allergy voice was upon me pretty heavily yesterday. I might have been reinvigorated. We will give it the old college try, but it is out there. I might have to pull the plug a little early. There's a lot of stories to get to and a lot of monologuing that I'm going to have to do to get to them. I will endeavor to get through them all, though. So let's begin with a story that I found over at The Atlantic. And the title of the piece is In Defense of Groupthink. I think before I get to the story, it just further proves what has been labeled as Trump derangement syndrome. How many people remember going to school and being told that you want to avoid the pitfalls of groupthink? You want to be able to think independently. Bring in a diversity of thought and ideas so you're not subject to just going with the whims of the mob. But apparently, because Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is an ally of our current occupant of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in the Oval Office, and he's mad and mean and orange and literally Hitler. That means that because Robert F. Kennedy has criticized groupthink with regard to medical science, that the mainstream leftist communist media is going to say it's a good thing. So what does the Atlantic report back? A small group of elite scientists settled upon the use of masks and lockdowns to fight the coronavirus. That's true. They closed ranks around their strategies and expelled dissenters. That's true. They actually used the government to identify dissenters and make sure that they were siloed or completely canceled. All of this was a classic groupthink, the Maha crowd has argued. Well, I think it extends further than the Maha crowd, but that was just one of the greatest overall examples of the way that groupthink, when it becomes empowered by government and it has a gross symbiotic relationship with private industry partnering with government, almost like fascism, they're able to infringe on Americans' First Amendment rights, to raise concerns about what's going on in their lives. That might have been a subject of concern for millions of Americans. And when we just look at the objective facts surrounding our nation's response to a chest cold, which apparently, according to the experts, they all agreed, we were told by our leftist Marxist media, all the experts agree that you should put this diaper on your face and stand 6 feet away from everybody so you won't get the chest cold and die. Well, that was provably false. And now the Atlantic is arguing that no, that wasn't groupthink. In fact, groupthink could be a good thing. Now, the argument is, ironically, Make America Healthy's core concern that the nation's most seasoned public health experts have been rendered senseless over many years by a groupthink dynamic is itself a product of groupthink. So they're trying to defeat their argument that groupthink is bad by saying that groupthink is good, but then also saying that the Make America Healthy, again, group is doing groupthink, which is bad. So we're back to leftist ideas bouncing and colliding into each other inside their heads, which is status quo for all leftists. I wanted to highlight this remark. Quote, in fact, most experts now believe that the old story of groupthink being a prime cause of bad decision-making is wrong. So most experts believe that's groupthink? No. I thought groupthink was good, and then it's bad, and then it's good, and then it's bad. I don't really care about the groupthink as a philosophy, as an argument. I think that there's been some scientific studies done on it, sociological studies about how it can happen. I mean, that was Candid Camera. How many of these examples we have of the person sitting in the elevator who doesn't know that everybody around them is participating in a study, and when the bell rings on the elevator door, everybody takes their hat off, and you see the person look around and see how they're influenced by their peers, and they take their hat off because they just want to get along. I mean, that's an example, not apples to apples, but parenthetically connected with groupthink and how everybody just doesn't want to be the person in the room that rubs everyone the wrong way, that looks around and says, hey, I got a problem with what we have. You're the black sheep if you do that. And I think for a long time, the concept of groupthink was justifiably a concern. Doesn't mean that what you're arguing is wrong. It just means you have to be on the lookout. Are we actually looking at the evidence? But here it's just funny because The Atlantic says that groupthink, yeah, we knew it was bad, but then we engaged in it and you called us out on it. So it's probably good. And now we're going to rely on it again. So because we want to dunk on the president because he's mean, orange, and literally Hitler, even though what's been pointed out by the principals within this administration where you guys might have made some mistakes with the science on it. All right, let's pivot over and sort of in line with the way that the media is now trying to recategorize groupthink. This is pretty disturbing. Now, this was an actual transcript of an interview that came from the New York Times, which was at one point a newspaper. And the headline kind of says it all and how disturbed we should be. Headline: we need to rethink how we think about the Holocaust. Now, this is an interview of a professor, an English professor. Her name is Marianne Hirsch. But don't let the fact that her focus, her silo, her subject matter expertise at Columbia University being English stop you from listening to her opinions on the Holocaust, because she is a professor. She's probably an expert. She's probably someone who could talk to an entire group of people and they would all agree that according to her, the Holocaust needs to be rethought. Some disturbing quotations from Professor Hirsch. This is a quote: there's an outsized influence of the Holocaust that then obscures other histories and also obscures what is happening right now, the genocide in Gaza. So she's a simp for Palestine. And I don't care where you stand on one thing or another. She wants to minimize looking at the Holocaust because she wants to focus on the events in Gaza. She wants to minimize millions of people being systemically executed and burned in ovens, is one of the most clear examples in the last century of white hats versus black hats. But she wants to focus on what she wants to focus on, which is Gaza. Another quote: why do so many school districts have mandated curricula on the Holocaust in this country and really all over the world? Why are we building new Holocaust museums right now? Oh, I don't know. So we can learn cautionary tales like Ordinary Men, like how Police Battalion 101, through groupthink, through peer pressure, went from saying, I don't know if what we're doing is the right thing, to then gleefully pushing people into ditches and executing them and shoving the women and children onto cattle cars to go off to the concentration camps. It's kind of an important lesson. That's would be my pushback against Professor Hirsch. But don't let my tried and true academic study that's been proven that we should probably highlight this, because never again is actually an effective message, because it can actually stop those sorts of atrocities from happening in the future, stop you from listening to her great ideas. She says, I think we need to go beyond teaching the Holocaust through identification and even empathy. Perhaps we need a little more distance. We need to push this to the back of our minds and not think about how millions of people were systemically executed. This is the past. We need to leave it in the past. The final thing is, and one historical phenomenon that is part of the Holocaust is actually the formation of the state of Israel and the Nakba, the expulsion of the Palestinians. So again, a simp for Palestine. She doesn't like Israel, and she wants to minimize the study of the Holocaust because she really wants our attention to go to Palestine and the plight that is there. Now, look, again, I don't care where you stand on one way or another. I don't think that minimizing what the Holocaust is and just saying, look, it's in the past, we don't talk about it anymore, is probably a good pursuit of history. There's a reason that you study history. There's a reason that when I have to study history with my kiddos and they just want to roll their eyes and not pay attention, then I have to say the old saying of those who fail to study history are doomed to repeat it. It's because there is nothing new under the sun. And unless you learn those lessons, you will make the same mistakes. As a parent, you don't want kids to make the same mistakes you made. You want them to make their own mistakes. That's one of the greatest endeavors that I have. That's one of the messages that I impart to my children. Look, if I have a certain experience where I royally screwed up, I'm going to tell you about it. That's history. And you can learn from it and avoid that very same mistake. I'm not saying it's going to make you perfect, but you will avoid the very clear pitfalls that fell upon me that could likely fall upon you. I think it's probably a good thing for us to study how millions of people were systemically executed in the hope that we would eliminate them from the face of the earth so that we don't repeat the same mistakes. But to try to tie the Atlantic with the New York Times at one point, a newspaper, it all kind of centers around this NPR former president. And we've played this clip before, but I think it's relevant here. They're not interested in the truth. They're interested in the outcomes. And they think that your pursuit or reverence for the truth is actually stopping them from what they want to do.
But one of the most significant differences, critical for moving from polarization to productivity, is that the Wikipedians who write these articles aren't actually focused on finding the truth. They're working for something that's a little bit more attainable, which is the best of what we can know right now. And after 7 years there, I actually believe that they're onto something. That for our most tricky disagreements, seeking the truth and seeking to convince others of the truth isn't necessarily the best place to start. In fact, I think our reverence for the truth might have become a bit of a distraction that is preventing us from finding consensus and getting important things done.
So you see, your pursuit or thinking that you're trying to find out what actually happened, learning history, that's a problem. They need to get things done. If you want to go out and learn about how millions of people were systemically executed, well, that's going to distract your attention from where it really needs to go. And that's sending aid over to Hamas. Or say you want to find out about how the medical establishment completely failed us 5 years ago, how the scientific community made up fake consensus, how it colluded with government to seize control of various mechanisms within private industry and told you to stay home and stay safe. Don't go to your non-essential job that you use to feed your family and pay your mortgage. And that might have been an effort afoot, a fascistic effort afoot to seize onto power and take control of you. You should probably learn about that and not repeat those same mistakes, and even take those mistakes as not being malevolent, maybe being benign. You just engaged in groupthink. Let's try to avoid that in the future so we don't make catastrophic mistakes on decision making with regard to government overreach and personal health. Well, you're looking at that pesky truth. You're stopping us from getting to what we really want, which is consensus. Ooh, groupthink. So we can actually get things done. What do they want to get done? Nothing really good if they're not interested in the truth. The truth is kind of a big sticking point here. And that's probably a nice way that we can pivot over to just a fun video, because we are in the latter 2025, which means that 2026 is kind of essentially upon us politically. We're already in the midterm cycles, which means we're already gearing up for the next presidential election. We've got would-be president, American Psycho lookalike Gavin Newsom saying that he's considering a run and he really hates how politicians lie to you. He's honest. There's this other guy that's out there and he just continues to be out there all the time. And I connect it with being honest and the media liking to lie and cover. And also there's a crazy connection with the Holocaust in this one. Here's J.B. Pritzker. This is a nice mashup that I saw, Libs for TikTok, because J.B. Pritzker says that he's never called Donald Trump Hitler before, but there's this pesky thing about the truth and the media.
I haven't suggested that Donald Trump is Hitler.
The dangers that we saw in Nazi Germany are the dangers that we need to react to now.
Well, I think everybody understands that at this point we've got an authoritarian in office. It doesn't take very long to tear apart a constitutional republic. Indeed, the Nazis did it in 53 days. That's not the country we live in. You shouldn't have to walk around with papers the way that they did in the early days of Nazi Germany. I do not invoke the specter of Nazis lightly. I'm watching with a foreboding dread what is happening in our country right now. A president who watches a plane go down in the Potomac and suggests without facts or findings that a diversity hire is responsible for the crash. The authoritarian playbook is laid bare here.
How can you possibly compare what happened in Germany in World War II to what's going on here in the United States?
Well, we're talking about the death of a constitutional republic. That's what happened in Germany in 1933, 1934. And we're seeing today that you've got an administration in Washington that's ignoring court orders. This is literally the end of the republic as we know it. If we don't stand up to Donald Trump.
It's not literally the end of the constitutional republic. I mean, are you planning on writing a book about the end of the constitutional republic, J.B. Pritzker? And then you have Jake Tapper there platforming the guy, and other members of the media allowing him to say, look, yeah, I never said that before. Those are all pretty recent clips. But you don't want the truth to get out there, because that prevents us from, how did she put it, getting to a consensus or something? I can't remember. Let's refresh.
But one of the most significant differences, critical for moving from polarization to productivity, is that the Wikipedians who write these articles aren't actually focused on finding the truth. They're working for something that's a little bit more attainable, which is the best of what we can know right now. And after 7 years there, I actually believe that they're onto something. That for our most tricky disagreements, seeking the truth and seeking to convince others of the truth isn't necessarily the best place to start. In fact, I think our reverence for the truth might have become a bit of a distraction that is preventing us from finding consensus and getting important things done.
All right. Well, she used to run NPR, and we all know that they take government funding so that they can spin whatever propaganda for the Marxist left in the country. What are they spinning? What are they talking about? Well, I found a couple of pieces over there that are worth going into, as your reverence for the truth might be getting in the way of them getting things done. What about a reverence for a separation of power under a small r Republican constitutional form of government that J.B. Pritzker was really concerned we might be literally losing right now? Are judges allowed to tell presidents how to talk to the media? Or I guess not talk, how to sign, how to go to the media? This is a piece from NPR. Headline is, Judge orders White House to use American Sign Language interpreters at briefings. I don't know what branch we are on the multiverse where the ego was attached to this, but yes, in fact, a federal judge is now telling the press secretary of the United States or any other counterparts within the public affairs office at the White House that they have to have somebody there to sign. The quote is, quote, White House press briefings engage the American people in important issues affecting their daily lives in recent months, war, the economy, and healthcare, and in recent years, a global pandemic. The judge here is U.S. District Judge Amir Ali. He wrote this in a preliminary injunction. Further quote comes from the Judge Ali. The exclusion of deaf Americans from that programming, in addition to likely violating the Rehabilitation Act, is clear and present harm that the court cannot meaningfully remedy in fact. So he's saying he has to issue this injunction now because the deaf people might miss crucial information, which they can get because every press conference has a transcript and there's closed captioning available on television. So what's the point here? Well, the point is to be obstructionist. The obstructionist is this guy, Judge Amir Ali, who the NPR president there was talking about the Wikipedians. So I relied on those Wikipedians and I went and found out about Judge Ali. Judge Ali was born in Canada. He's Egyptian Canadian, yet he's a federal judge in the United States of America. He was born in Ontario, Canada, spent most of his childhood in Burlington, Ontario. He received his judicial commission November 22nd, 2024. So after a presidential election in which Donald Trump was elected the next president of the United States and was in the transition period, this guy became a federal judge appointed by Joe Biden. Now, Joe Biden had that ability to do But I think it's kind of in bad faith when you have already had a mandate come through our democracy, and the new guy's coming in, and yet this guy gets elevated to the bench for a lifetime appointment. And he sees his mandate now is to do the bidding of the Joe Bidens and to be an obstructionist in any way he can. Well, is this really earth-shattering? Does this create a massive problem? They're probably just going to hire a sign linguist. I think that's what they call it. A sign linguist is going to have to go up there and message out whatever Carolyn Levitt or whoever's speaking at the mic is saying. But it's just further evidence that they're not interested in actually getting things done. What they're interested in getting done is just obstructing people who they seem to have fundamental political disagreements with, ideological disagreements, or they just think that they're mean, orange, and literally Hitler, and they want to be a bee in their bonnet. Another note on this judge. Judge Ali, he issued a temporary restraining order restricting the implementation of a different executive order. So apart from the American Sign Language requirement that now comes down, which I don't see how it's legal. I don't see how you can compel the executive branch to hire somebody who doesn't already have a position. It's not like they fired the person and saying, well, you did that illegally. You're now requiring the executive branch to spend money, which during a shutdown they might not have. But this other executive order, it would have ordered cuts to funding for USAID. So Judge Ali, the entire time, wants to impede on the Donald Trump Part 2 administration's agenda to cut government spending, cut waste, as it's opposed to sending our dollars to foreign countries or to organizations that are carve-outs for the political left to then launder back so that they can get their people elected into office. The executive order was supposed to stop that, and this judge wanted that to stop. Now, he's a crazy leftist judge, and so is this guy. This is reporting from the New York Post on a different judge. Headline is, Judge who ruled against the Trump funding freeze has ties to taxpayer-funded homeless organization. Now, we discussed, I believe on Tuesday, this judge, his name is John McConnell. He comes from Rhode Island. Now, in his background, he was on this board for this homeless organization. The homeless organization is called Crossroads Rhode Island. Now, he was on the board allegedly from 2006 to at least 2023. He claims to have divested from it, but that's not been proven. But if we take him for his word, he was at least on this board for 18 years. During that time, his organization received $128 million in government funds. I believe it was 2/3 of the money that came into this nonprofit was from the government. So the government giving your money to a homeless organization, I mean, you might believe in it, you might not believe in it. I don't believe that they should, through theft, I mean taxes, take away your money so that they can give it to a homeless organization. I think if you believe in helping the homeless, you should probably just give it yourself. It should be up to you. But in January, the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, that's human resources for our federal government, they issued a memo calling for a pause on certain types of federal financial assistance. Now, they have actually rescinded that, but at the time, this judge said, no, you can't do that. You can't rescind federal financial assistance. And there was a lawsuit that was brought before him, included 23 states, and it also included the District of Columbia, and among the 23 states was his state, Rhode Island. So Rhode Island, during this lawsuit, said that we need to require the federal government to continue to give financial assistance to the states so that they can issue grants to organizations like his Crossroads Rhode Island group. So this judge issued an injunction which would have forced the federal government to give money to the organization which he was part of. It's kind of lining his pocket. And that's the guy right now who's claiming that the federal government must use emergency funds to fund supplemental nutrition assistance program, SNAP food stamps. So very much like Judge Ali, involving himself in multiple ways in order to subvert the mandate of a democratically elected presidential administration through our democracy a mandate that came down, winning the popular vote, not just the Electoral College, and yet the judge overstepping the Article 3 powers that are supposed to be vested in him as he sits at the bench. He's going to involve himself in not just forcing our government to spend emergency funds, which I don't know how he has the authority to do, spending emergency funds on food stamps, which are canceled for 8 days at this point. They're supplemental. They're not supposed to last for an entire month, but use funds that could otherwise be allocated to things like we might have to fight China and send our missiles and planes and tanks and boats. We need funding to do that. We should draw down on those funds to make sure that people get SNAP, and also forcing the government to send money to the states so that the states can turn around and give money to his organization, which I think he probably gets a nice little shekel or two from. And he's uber involved in homelessness. So we can use that again to pivot over to the next story we have on the Saturday grab bag here on the American Radicals podcast. And that one comes from the Federalist, because this judge, McConnell, he sat on this board of Crossroads, Rhode Island, doing good for the homeless. But there are a lot of organizations out there which purport to advocate on behalf of the homeless, and yet they don't. They kind of exist in that space just so they can fundraise and engage in other leftist sort of political endeavors, because helping the homeless shouldn't be a left or right issue. It should be a charitable issue. It shouldn't be something the government's involved in any way. But it is, because the government is too big. Your government is too big. So there's a piece from the Federalist, and it reports on radical leftist groups perpetuating a homeless crisis, and yet for their own benefit, like Judge McConnell. And to kick off this piece, and I believe, and Rose Lopez will have to dig deep into the archives of the American Radicals podcast to find out if we addressed it. I think we did, Rose. We talked about this town in Oregon called Grants Pass. Small city, 40,000 people. There was a Supreme Court decision that actually came down that struck down a lower court decision. So Grants Pass wins at the Supreme Court level on a case where they basically said that homeless people can't just camp in our city. And the case involved Eighth Amendment, protection against cruel and unusual punishment. And the town said, it's not cruel and unusual to say that homeless people can't just camp in our city parks. This is a quality of life issue. People are paying property taxes, and these people are taking advantage of it. We have the ability to police them in the area and force them out. And they won. But that wasn't the end of the story, because some homeless, and as the Federalist characterizes them, homeless advocates, they filed another lawsuit now, and it's at a state level. And they said that this town, Grants Pass, violated state law because they were required, their local ordinances that are regulating sitting, lying, or sleeping, or keeping warm and dry on public property is open to an objective, reasonable standard. Objectively reasonable. It's a very vague term. And the homeless advocates, the leftist organizations that argued to the state level court because they lost at the SCOTUS level, said that Grants Pass had passed these city ordinances and they were not objectively reasonable. Removing the homeless encampments out of the area fell afoul of state law. And rather than continuing to fight, because they already fought it all the way to the Supreme Court, they just settled. Grants Pass now has 150 units for the homeless, and they give them potable water so they can just camp out in public on the public dole. But that's sort of the launch off narrative. That's the story to get you pulled into this piece that actually gets into what researchers are tracking. And again, coming from the Federalist, researchers tracked hundreds of advocacy groups like the ones that brought this civil lawsuit against Grants Pass. And these groups are supposedly committed to helping the homeless. The vast majority of them are nonprofits, and they are prohibited from engaging in partisan political activity. You're just supposed to focus on what you say you're going to focus on. You want to focus on helping the homeless? Okay. You shouldn't be out there picketing, though, on behalf of Free Palestine or the Sun Monster. Now, leftist coalitions within this network are devoting their time to everything, though, from expanding abortion laws to standing in solidarity with Hamas. In 2023, a majority of the 700 nonprofits that weighed in on Grants Pass, they received almost $3 billion in government grants, very much like Judge McConnell wants that money to keep flowing. So your money, to the tune of almost $3 billion, went to 700 organizations that say they advocate for the homeless. Meanwhile, they're saying that we need to free Palestine and we need to expand abortion. One of those groups, you should know, is the Southern Poverty Law Center, which characterized Moms for Liberty, moms who were wanting to go to school board meetings and say, stop teaching my kids that they can cut off their balls and penis and become a girl, or stop forcing my kids to wear a mask that's provably not helping their health, even though the experts through groupthink said it did. Those moms, they're terrorists. Southern Poverty Law Center gets federal funding because they want to help the homeless. Well, money's fungible. Whatever money they were actually going to use, maybe through a good faith effort to help the homeless, well, that can now be rerouted to something different. They can go out there and characterize other groups, maybe like a Turning Points USA as a hate group. And then when you have a president American psycho Gavin Newsom or J.B. Pritzker in office, they can take the Southern Poverty Law Center's reports on their hate maps and hand it off to an intel analyst within national security, federal law enforcement, who can draft a nice intelligence bulletin, intelligence report, intelligence product, which says that Turning Points USA should be categorized as a domestic terrorist organization, and anybody there who is contributing to them or attending their gatherings or posting about them on social media or wearing their merch, they're providing material support to terrorism. You see how this works? Well, that's a theoretical. That's in a future administration. We can talk about some of the things that are going on within the current Department of Justice. And another piece from NPR, which is very upset and very sad about what's going on at the DOJ, who is firing some immigration judges. So the headline of this piece is the DOJ has been firing judges with immigrant defense backgrounds. A nice picture there of a masked up ICE agent with an American flag on the wall, and that American flag is actually hanging backwards. Stars are always on the left, guys, if you didn't know. But to this piece, there has been a pattern. Every few months this year, a new class of immigration judges gets a termination notice in the middle of the day, often while they're in the middle of a court proceeding. It was previously common for civil servants to be converted to permanent employees by the DOJ, but there are a lot of these probationary immigration judges who are still on the bench and they're being fired, which, if you don't know, you're a probationary employee, it could last from anywhere from 12 to 24 months. You can be fired for any reason. No cause is necessary. And the current Department of Justice, under the Trump administration and the leadership of Pam Bondi, allegedly as the Attorney General of the United States, is atop that department. They're using that to fire probationary judges. And NPR says that that's wrong. They shouldn't do it. Well, they can. They can exert that. They can execute that protocol in order to do total personnel warfare. I think that's probably within their purview. Well, not probably. It is. It's probably a good thing, especially when a lot of these immigration judges have a background in immigrant defense, not because they believe that due process matters, but because they're bleeding heart leftist communists who have now become judges. So NPR, they did a really in-depth big J journalism study. They independently identified 70 judges who received termination notices. And during their analysis of those judges, of their professional backgrounds, they found that almost half of them were background in immigrant defense. Also, NPR notes that the Department of Justice is prioritizing other judges to hire. Total personnel warfare. The Trump administration has moved to bring back immigration judges it sees as unfairly fired by the Biden administration. And the incoming class of permanent judges are mostly those with a background working for the Executive Office of Immigration Review, well, that's with the DOJ, and the Department of Homeland Security. So we're bringing back people with experience working in prosecuting against illegal aliens or working on deportations through the Department of Homeland Security, and we're going to make them the judges. Well, our democracy installed a president who campaigned on the issue of mass deportations. Kind of flows then that they would hire personnel who are interested in mass deportations. But NPR is very upset about it, and they want to call it out. And I want to give a helmet sticker. Good job. Total personnel warfare. That's the only way that we're out of this. If there's going to be an objectively good result of electing a president who campaigned on this issue, which other than inflation, immigration was the number one or number two, 1A issue. The American people demanded that. In order to do that, to effectuate that mandate, that will require personnel. And the Trump administration, through the Department of Justice, through the firing of the bleeding heart leftist Marxist judges who want all the illegal aliens to stay in the country, in favor of immigration judges who want all the illegal aliens to be removed from the country, and they're following the due process that's attached to that. I think that's probably a good thing. All right, we could pivot over now. I've got several stories that pertain to local or state matters. So let's start first with local, and we can go to Ohio. I think I actually have two from Ohio, but this one is more local, and it's related to the city of Cincinnati, two separate pieces. First one is Cincinnati council candidate Kevin Farmer was arrested. He was breaking into a congressional hopeful's home. So this guy's running for city council in Cincinnati, and he broke into somebody who's running for Congress's house, because we only elect the best people in this country. But the story kind of evolved, and it makes a lot more sense once you dig into it and its adjoining piece. And this comes from Cincinnati.com. Now, the would-be council member, or the aspiring member of the city council, his name, Kevin Farmer, he was charged about a week ago with burglary and violating a protection order. They're both felonies. Now, according to the court documents, he trespassed into a home of Rosemary Oglesby Henry, who is running for Ohio's 1st congressional district. Now, he broke into her home by shattering and climbing through a garage door window. In late September, they note the victim in this case, Rosemary Oglesby Henry, she was accused of aiming a gun at him at the same residence, and she was charged with misdemeanor aggravated assault. So the adjoining piece where I kind of got more clarification, and there's a picture of Miss Rosemary Oglesby Henry. Headline is congressional candidate arrested accused of pointing gun. And that's when you find out what actually was going on here. They state that she aimed a gun at Kevin Farmer, and they were having an argument in the bedroom, and he actually said, "Shoot me." So she pointed a gun at him. Court records show that Farmer was accused a couple months earlier of hitting her. So this is a domestic violence situation. I'm laughing at it, but domestic violence, not a laughing matter. These two folks probably should address what's going on between them in their relationship. Domestic violence, no laughing matter. And they probably should focus on that rather than running for elected office, particularly if they get into elected office and either have to be removed or there's compromising material. I mean, if Rosemary Oglesby Henry is a federally elected representative from Ohio's 1st congressional district, what are the odds that this might be pulling her and her attention to somewhere else? And that wouldn't just hurt the people who are in her district, but it actually theoretically could hurt the entire country. She could be pulled away from a crucial vote or a committee hearing where her attention is necessary. And instead, she's worried about a temporary restraining order or a protective order against her ex-boyfriend who might be representing the city of Cincinnati. Handle your own business, folks, before you get into politics. I'm not expecting you to be perfect, but at least don't have a pending felony hanging over your head. All right, we can go over now to Kansas. Again, this is a local matter, and this isn't a city council member. This is a mayor who Kansans elected and apparently isn't an American citizen.
Good afternoon. We are tracking breaking news at this hour. The mayor of Coldwater accused of election fraud. The charges come hours after he secured a second term in office. Attorney General Chris Kobach charged Mayor Jose Joe Ceballos with 6 felonies, 3 counts each of voting without being qualified and election perjury. Kobach claims Ceballos is lawfully living in the U.S., but is a citizen of Mexico, making him ineligible to vote. The AG alleges the mayor illegally cast ballots in the August 2024 primary and November 2022 and 2023 general elections.
In large part, our system right now is based on trust. Trust that when the person signs the registration or signs the poll books saying that he's a qualified elector or that he is a United States citizen, that the person is telling the truth.
We reached out to Mayor Ceballos for comment, but have not heard back yet. The Coldwater City Council, though, released a statement on social media saying the mayor called them in for a special meeting over the noon hour to, quote, discuss recent events that have transpired with the Kansas Attorney General's office. While the recent allegations involving the mayor are understandably concerning, we will allow the proper legal process to take its course before making any further comments, unquote.
All right. So I guess he could theoretically be the mayor. He isn't illegal. He's legally residing in the United States. The crime, from what I'm reading then and getting from that report, was that he just couldn't vote for himself. Okay. Good luck with that, Kansas. Good luck with that. Coldwater, I believe. Yeah, Coldwater. They're going to allow him to remain mayor, by the way, while this plays itself out. You would think that he might step away to deal with the 6 felonies that are on his plate, but communists never give up power. All right, we can move on over out of Kansas and go over to Michigan, and this is relating to some education. We got a couple stories in education. This one is about the Board of Education that is changing the sex ed curriculum and the concerns that are attached with that. Also have a video, as you can tell, trying to save my voice here so we can get through everything on the Saturday grab bag. Let's hear about this new initiative. Michigan is changing over its long-term sex ed curriculum.
Society for Health Education, otherwise known as SIECUS. You can write this down, SIECUS. You can go to their website, siecus.org, and you will see very clearly what they advocate for in curriculums. They believe that abstinence is failing our kids. Teaching abstinence is ineffective. They believe that teaching abstinence to children threatens the fundamental human right of sex. They believe that we should be encouraging our children safe and healthy ways to engage in sex. And in Michigan, we know that the age of consent is 16. So why would SIECUS be working with our Board of Education to teach this to 3rd graders, 8 and 9-year-olds?
Well, we know why they're doing that, right? I mean, it's pretty clear. They want to make sure that we're indoctrinating the kids. We're conditioning the kids into engaging in activities that are promiscuous and bad for them so that they make bad decisions. And then they have to rely on the government. Or actually, you just get a little bit of help from your teacher because your teacher understands you. Your parents don't. I can't think of a benign and innocent reason, but I could be wrong. I am, after all, just a hobbyist podcaster. Now, under the current state law, looking off here to this piece that I had from the Midwesterner, and I'll pull it up. Headline here, more details about this Michigan curriculum. Despite age of consent being 16, State Board of Education, this is not local, this is state, for the entire state of Michigan. They want to teach safe and healthy sex to 8-year-olds. So under the current state law, Michigan schools must teach about HIV and AIDS, but they're not required to provide broader sex education, so health matters. When schools do offer it, the curriculum must emphasize abstinence as a positive lifestyle for unmarried young people. You know, wholesome, common sense, almost like a biblical worldview. But the leftist communists want to change that. So the new proposal calls for lessons that address sexual orientation and gender identity and gender expression, all about the LGBTQAI plus 2S_# rainbow kamikaze. And the proposed guidelines also include strategies for preventing pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections, emphasize the importance of communication with partners, use of contraception, and pleasuring oneself. That's great. We can teach the 8-year-olds about how to masturbate. Well done, everyone. Congratulations, Michigan. You all voted for it. and you're probably going to get it good and hard. And I meant that as a pun intended. All right. And on the subject of school, we can go over to another communist utopia, the People's Communist Republic of Massachusetts. Sorry, George Hill. Another piece that I have about schooling. Massachusetts middle school is now asking students questions about their sexuality and suicide and climate change. All right. From this piece, they asked multiple questions. And actually, National Review is the reporting party here, but I did find this other one called defendinged.org, which did a more in-depth dive on the school district, which is the Medfield Public Schools. And this is called a health survey, they called it. One question was, quote, some people describe themselves as transgender when their sex at birth does not match the way they think or feel about their gender. Are you transgender? Another one asks, during the past 12 months, did you injure yourself on purpose? Before I continue, I can kind of connect those two, and that would be a concern. My friend Andrea Gomez would certainly say that is a concern. This seems to comport quite nicely with social emotional learning, SEL, where they're going to try to data mine on kids. They're going to get them to ask questions about their suicidality, which has a high correlation with people who think that Harry can become Sally and they can remove healthy breast tissue or a penis and testicles and then just transition into being the opposite sex. There's a high correlation there with suicidality. Well, if you have a high level of suicidality or you have gender dysphoria, which is in the DSM-5 as a psychiatric condition, well, maybe we need to take note of you. Maybe we should put you into some sort of registry. You shouldn't have access to firearms. And when we say you, we mean everyone who you live with, because you can't possibly live in a house that has access to firearms. Damn that Second Amendment. This is all about safety. And I can't even do the sheep bowing because of my voice, but you know where I'm talking from. This sounds like social emotional learning. Now, the climate aspect to this, the sun monster, Gaia worshippers who are angry at you for driving your SUVs, they must have insisted that the sixth graders had to answer questions, and they had to ask to be about what were they doing to help reduce the effects of climate change. Well, maybe you're killing yourself because that way you're not expelling as much carbon into the atmosphere. Probably the most disturbing aspect of this was that Thomas Blake, middle school principal, his name is, or her name, Nat Vaughn, asked parents in an email to, quote, not share the survey with anyone else. They wanted secrecy. They didn't want to be embarrassed that they were doing this data mining. And the survey comes from an organization called Metro West Health Foundation, which I did a little bit of deep dive investigation, AMRAD pod style at Real Steve Friend, looking at it. And really, anytime I do these sorts of deep dives, the first thing I always look at is who's funding it. And that's what I did. So you should know, because you could say, hey, Steve, what do I care about some little podunk district in Massachusetts? That's communist. That's ceded territory anyway. Well, they're doing a survey. They're partnering with an organization that's funded by NASA, National Science Foundation, USAID, and then the Departments of Agriculture, Education, Health and Human Services, Labor, State, Veterans Affairs, and the Department of Justice. So your tax dollars going to pay for this regardless of where you live. And they didn't just rely on your tax dollars. They made sure to reach out to some great nonprofit organizations that are only involved in human flourishing and helping everyone. And those would be the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Carnegie, Ford Foundation, and the World Health Organization. So congratulations to everyone. This is how global communism / fascism, as we partner with private entities and our federal government, are then able to get their fingertips into your local jurisdiction with those good golden handcuffs, that sweet, sweet government cash. And now they're asking students questions about their suicidality so they can take away your guns. Well done. Glad I did that investigation. Maybe Massachusetts will take up some concern with it, but I'm not going to hold my breath out. It is, after all, ceded territory. And on the subject of ceded territory, let's talk about J.B. Pritzker's Illinois. where they really, really want people to die. Now, they're all about murdering babies, but this is actually at the other end of the spectrum because the state of Illinois just passed a assisted suicide bill. So they're going to wait on Pritzker to sign it, and he will. This comes from ChicagoCatholic.com. And for obvious reasons, the Catholics are opposed to it. But the headline is Illinois state legislature passes assisted suicide bill. And this is not just a knock on the state of Illinois. I think it's a greater overall knock on multiple states, and it is a cultural commentary. So the bill, it's SB 1950. It's known as the End of Life Options for Terminally Ill Patients Act. And it could make it legal for residents to end their life with the aid of a physician. And you know those experts who said that you should put a diaper on your face, stand 6 feet apart, inject an experimental vaccine into your arm, and when it makes your heart explode from myocarditis, just, I don't know, take some fat killing Ozempic to bring your heart size down. I don't know. I'm just trying to connect the dots here. But the physicians who took an oath they're supposed to have integrity about to do no harm are now going to be authorized to help you kill yourself in Illinois. The practice has been legalized either by referendum or vote of a state legislature or court decisions in 9 different states and District of Columbia, so 10 different jurisdictions. And the first one was narrowly passed in the state of Oregon. It was called the Death with Dignity Act, and it happened 31 years ago. Not to be too biblical here, but I will summon my inner Garrett O'Boyle at GOB Actual, my on hiatus compadre co-host. There is no death with dignity. Death isn't supposed to contain dignity. Death wasn't supposed to happen. It goes back to the garden. Death was a result of hubris and failing to listen to what you were told and a lack of obedience to a higher power. There is no death with dignity. So that's a logical fallacy, or it's a biblical fallacy that could only be reached by people who are not comporting with what Catholic Chicago is arguing for, and that is the sanctity of life. And that's the end of life for many. We can talk about the beginning of life, and we can go back to not just the mean, orange, literally Hitler administration currently in power, but also to our broken leftist Marxist media, because this one comes from the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness, and they are really, really angry and upset that Maine clinics are going to end primary care. So the headline is that the Trump funding cuts are forcing rural Maine clinics to end primary care. That would be just you went in there for a broken leg or a head cold, and these health establishments, medical establishments, which are really concerned with doing no harm, are not going to be able to afford to provide that care for you because the president is mean, orange, literally Hitler, and doesn't want babies to be murdered. So digging into this WAPO piece, there's a Maine Family Planning is the name of the center. They lost Medicaid funding. Now that's funding for poor people. They lost it a few months back in July as a result of the One Big Beautiful Bill. Now, tucked into the One Big Beautiful Bill was a ban on Medicaid funding for any healthcare providers that perform abortion services. So, the way that this was laid out in the bill, if you are a medical establishment and you're murdering babies, we are not going to give you federal funds. Now, you might argue that the Medicaid funding is not for murdering babies, but as I talked about before, money is fungible. That's just the reality. And if we give you money at all, you could use it for other things that you were planning on doing and take the money that was already earmarked for those other things, like, I don't know, broken legs and head colds and pap smears and breast exams, any of those things that are primary care, and you could use it to murder babies. So in effect, you're one derivative away, but we would be using taxpayer dollars to fund murdering babies, and we're not going to do it. Now, what happened? What do these health centers do? Were they really focused on providing primary care? Are they uber concerned about people walking in there and saying, hey, look, we rely on those dollars, and like, I don't think the government should be in the business of giving dollars for health. I think the government should be out of the business, but I think I'm outvoted on it, and that's the system we live in. So if these medical establishments are saying, look, we're interested in providing care, and we're not going to be able to do that if we continue to murder babies, we should just get rid of that feature, get rid of that service from our organization, and we should just continue treating the broken legs and the head colds and the pap smears and the breast exams. But they didn't do that. Instead, they're going to get rid of treating the broken legs and the head colds and the pap smears and the breast exams, and they're only going to do the abortions, which could lead you to one of two logical deductions. One, they're just love killing babies. And that could be true. I mean, that's what communists do. They're not really worried about a bottom line because they think in the end of things, when they win and they take over and fundamentally transform our system, they can just print money and they'll have it anyway. And maybe it's just a religion to them. They love murdering babies and they're willing to stand by their principles, murder as many babies as possible. They don't care about the bottom line. It's evil, but at least I can respect having principles. Or murdering babies is more lucrative than treating people for primary maladies like broken legs. So they just went with the bottom line that just happened to coincide with their ideology. And a final quote from this piece from the WAPO comes from the president and CEO of Maine Family Planning. His name is George Hill, no relation, said that eliminating primary care services felt like the only way to make up for the loss of roughly $2 million in Medicaid funding per year because of the new tax law. And that's your answer. They make more than $2 million killing babies, so it's worth it to them. They had to cut off the leg to save the body, and the leg in this case happened to be treating broken legs in favor of murdering babies. All right, I think I am through with the state and local level things, but I do have probably a half dozen more so stories here to go on the Saturday grab bag. And I want to talk about the DOJ, which could be reopening or continuing to look at Black Lives Matter, which came to prominence before 2020, but certainly within people's situational awareness or greater overall awareness during the St. George Floyd riots. This is a piece from the Associated Press. And headline is Justice Department investigating fraud allegations in Black Lives Matter movement. Well, let's find out about what these fraud allegations entail. DOJ investigating whether leaders of BLM defrauded donors who contributed tens of millions of dollars during racial justice protests in 2020. They caused billions of dollars in damage and they're called protests. I guess we're editorializing a little bit here from the Associated Press. Now, Black Lives Matter said it took in over $90 million in donations, quote from the Associated Press. And they took those donations in, quote, following the 2020 murder of George Floyd, a Black man whose last breaths under the knee of a white Minneapolis police officer. Now, the Black Lives Matter movement first emerged in 2013. So it was already in existence when George Floyd died of excited delirium from a fentanyl overdose. But since 2013, that they emerged, and that was because of George Zimmerman, who the media that isn't interested in the truth and actually thinks your pursuit of the truth is preventing us from getting things done. When he wound up killing Trayvon Martin after Trayvon Martin attacked him, and George Zimmerman was characterized as a white Hispanic because he's Hispanic, and they wanted to make sure that it was racially motivated and they had to have a white guy. Then also in 2014, we had the death of Michael Brown, which the Associated Press says was at the hands of police in Ferguson, Missouri. Yeah, it was at the hands of police after he tried to take the gun away from the police officer and got shot. And that's where they made Black Lives Matter this rallying cry for progressives and a favorite target for the derision of conservatives. I think it's a target for people who think that fraud is a problem. What fraud? I mean, it took in $90 million. I mean, were they putting it for good use? Were they out there in the streets exercising their First Amendment right to say that excited delirium was a problem that the cops were at fault of? No, they were using it on things like buying houses for themselves, which conveniently the Associated Press reported on. Headline at Black Lives Matter House: families are welcome into space of freedom and healing. Whatever, whatever they're welcome into. They spent $6 million on a house for themselves. They took $90 million in and used 1/15 of it for a house. That's a scam. Now, the question is there going to be an ongoing criminal conspiracy, or is there a statute of limitations issue? And apparently, currently, our Department of Justice is going to be looking into it. And if there's any sort of fraud, they defrauded people who believed in what they were arguing for, which would mean they defrauded the communist leftists who think that George Floyd died at the hands of a police officer rather than a fentanyl overdose. They should feel like they got ripped off. They should want Black Lives Matter held accountable if they have principles, but they'll probably say, they can have that house. They got what we wanted, which was civil unrest, which was racial riots happening, which resulted in the election of a human Roomba to be president of the United States for 4 years. Well, human Roomba isn't in place anymore. We have a president who is mean, orange, literally Hitler, who is not only trying to, I guess, push out too many illegal aliens in the eyes of our leftist media, but might have done something that I have a problem with, and that's being dishonest about your tariff policy. Now, I'm not an economic expert. I've said that before. I don't know if the tariffs are going to do good or do bad. And really, it's not within my control because the president of the United States kind of has that unilateral power to bring about these tariffs. But there's a Supreme Court case going on right now because we have to have lots of lawsuits going on to impede the current administration from going about doing its agenda that it advertised. Donald Trump was not secret about the fact that he believed in tariffs and he believed the tariffs were going to fund the government and wanted to raise tariffs to reduce our trade deficit. And I'm not going to get into the nerdy economic stuff, but I am sort of a stickler for being honest. Now, this headline, it comes from the Washington Post because democracy dies in darkness. Headline is: White House tells Supreme Court it doesn't care about the tariff money raised. Well, if that's true, I got a problem because I was told it was going to fund our government. From the story, this is recent arguments that were going on in front of the Supreme Court, and they pertain to some tariffs that have been imposed. And the Solicitor General, he's basically the lawyer for the federal government, is up there making the argument. Now, the Trump administration told the Supreme Court that raising government revenue is not actually the purpose of emergency tariffs. Now, at issue is these emergency tariffs, I guess not standard tariffs. The quote from the Solicitor General, whose name is D. Jean Sauer, quote, "These are regulatory tariffs. They are not revenue-raising tariffs," which is interesting because tariffs raise revenue regardless. But the fact that they raise revenue is only incidental. The tariffs would be most effective, so to speak, if no person ever paid them. So they basically want to use regulatory tariffs to hurt our geopolitical rivals. Now, through August, the government collected $90 billion from these U.S. importers via the tariffs that were imposed under this emergency. $90 billion. Well, I mean, I'm not going to turn down $90 billion. We are spending somewhere in the area of $70,000 of debt per second. So $90 billion might be able to finance us for a day or two. But I was reliably assured that tariffs were going to take the place of taxation, as far as funding our government. So I just did, a modicum of research, found out how much money our federal government takes in, what they call revenue theft, either through taxation or through these duties, through tariffs. The total amount of money that our government took in last year was just a shade under $5 trillion, $4.92 trillion. So 90 billion to 5 trillion. That's less than 2%. 2% of the revenue to our government reflected through these emergency tariffs. They're theoretically supposed to be funding the government in the future. We can get rid of theft and just rely on tariffs. So it's not enough money. Let's be honest. Now, it could be enough money if we were to reduce our government footprint by 98%. I'd be on board with that. You want to bring in 2% of the revenue, then you should have 2% of the government that we currently have because our government's too big. But just it got into my head where we're going to have tariffs to level the playing field and restore our trade balance. And then when we go to court, we say, well, it's not really about funding the government at all. I don't like dishonesty. It just rubs me the wrong way. And it reminded me of somebody else, an equal opportunity criticizer here. I'm going to criticize the Trump administration on this. I don't think you were honest with the American people about what your intentions were with these tariffs that people are paying for. I mean, $90 billion. That's not coming from the imports. That's being passed on to the people making the purchases. So for all you talk about, well, those foreign companies, those foreign countries, they're paying it. No, the people that are consuming those materials, those goods are paying it because they're paying a higher price. You're in effect using a taxation on your own people. But it reminded me of this guy, who I'm sure this audience doesn't have any love lost for, when he was running for president, would-be President Barack Obama, and he was talking about the capital gains tax theft that we have, and he wanted to raise it. And he, at least on his face, was honest about what he was, and that was not raising revenue.
All right. You have, however, said you would favor an increase in the capital gains tax. As a matter of fact, you said on CNBC, and I quote, "I certainly would not go above what existed under Bill Clinton, which was 28%. It's now 15%. That's almost a doubling if you went to 28%. But actually, Bill Clinton in 1997 signed legislation that dropped the capital gains tax to 20%. Right. And George Bush has taken it down to 15%. And in each instance, when the rate dropped, revenues from the tax increased. The government took in more money. And in the 1980s, when the tax was increased to 28%, the revenues went down. So why raise it at all, especially given the fact that 100 million people in this country own stock and would be affected?"
Well, Charlie, what I've said is that I would look at raising the capital gains tax for purposes of fairness. We saw an article today which showed that the top 50 hedge fund managers made $29 billion.
All right, sorry, he's going to completely deflect. Did you catch it? For the purposes of fairness. Oh, and we saw those mean billionaires who already paid income taxes on the money and then invested it and are being taxed again on passive income. So a comparison between federal income taxes and capital taxes is an apples to oranges comparison that the Democrats, i.e. Marxist, communist, leftists, love to do. But for the purposes of this comparison, try to sneak that in there. I'm not worried about revenue at all. Why would he? He's a communist. He's just going to print as much money as it requires. He's interested in punishing his enemies, which is why he wanted to raise the capital gains tax. He wanted to double it. He really, really wanted to go after those billionaires because that's what communists do. They reward their friends and punish their enemies, and they pit different classes against each other. In this country, the economic argument doesn't work all the time. He tried it really there. He tried to say the working man, they're getting screwed because they're paying a higher tax rate than those billionaires. Meanwhile, the working man is paying a federal income tax, and the billionaire is paying that same tax. He's actually paying more because we have a progressive income tax, but his capital gains tax, which is on top of the income tax, is lower. So we need to pit them against each other. And there's more working men than there are billionaires. So those working men will probably vote for me because I'm able to give them and satiate that bloodlust that they have and say, I'm going to go get those guys for fairness. It's the same thing that we're seeing in New York City, where we're getting the coalitional forces together and they're going to go after those mean, evil, rich people that they're going to use tax dollars from their rich people's money in order to finance their free healthcare and subsidize housing and grocery stores and buses, whatever that Mom Donnie wants to do. Well, good luck. Good luck. Enjoy it. But I don't appreciate the lying. I don't appreciate the manipulation that goes there. I don't care if it's Barack Obama. I don't care if it's Donald Trump. Tell us what you're doing and why you're doing it. You owe us that. People are democratically electing you. You owe us a modicum of truth. And if the purpose of the tariffs was to just punish somebody, tell us that. Tell us that and allow us to imbibe that information and maybe be willing to go along with it and absorb the temporary pain. It doesn't hurt you to be honest. All right. We can go to one more story I got as we are going to wrap things up here on the American Radicals podcast, Saturday Grab Bag edition. And this one, I just completely out of left field, saw it. It kind of hit me in the feels because it involves a Native American reservation, and it comes from the Daily Mail. The headline is, Native American tribe snatches pilot's plane from him after he made an emergency landing on the reservation. Well, we're dealing with the FAA shortages and the lost flights. Maybe you want to charter a Cessna to make that little puddle hop jump over to northern Minnesota. Well, hopefully you don't have any mechanical problems. So our pilot's name is Darren. He was flying over Red Lake Indian Reservation, who I know some of the members of that tribe, when his single-engine Stinson airplane suddenly stopped working midair. He had less than 3 minutes until disaster, and as an experienced pilot, he forced a landing down on a paved state road. So a road paid for by state coffers, state taxpayers. Moments later, his plane was confiscated by tribal police. They claimed he didn't have the authority to fly it over the reservation. So the problem wasn't that he landed on the road because they didn't own the road. It's that they alleged that they own the air on top of the reservation. So Darren was told his plane violated the tribe's 1978 land banning any airplane from flying over Red Lake lands at less than 20,000 feet, which he very clearly did when he made a landing, which was under 20,000 feet. The quote from Darren is, "The land is theirs, but they're claiming that the air is theirs." And now he's fighting to get his plane back. This is the corruption that goes on in these Indian reservations. I never saw a plane confiscated, but there's just the rampant corruption that exists. It is a completely different country, and I mean that in true effect. Remember very clearly driving out to the Indian reservation for the first time, and I had transitioned from a smartphone to a flip phone because I didn't need the smartphone anymore. So for my personal phone, I just had a flip phone, and the chime alerted, and I earmuffs for the kids. I looked down at my phone while I was driving, and I saw the message that said, "You are leaving the United States. Do you want to accept roaming charges?" You go out there and it's a completely different world. And they're doing their own thing. They're using their own laws. They're banishing people, even though it's questionable whether or not you can do that. They are, as a tribal council, firing prosecutors when one of their family members is on trial. So then there's no prosecution and the person walks free. They're putting people in jail for 40 days for sexual assaults because they can't charge felonies. They're firing police chiefs when they get a ticket that they didn't like. I mean, it is like a third world country. It's Mad Max is probably more of a relative comparison that goes on out there. And apparently, if you have to make an emergency landing, they don't come up to you and say, "Bro, that's crazy. I can't believe that. Let me buy you a drink. This story's amazing." No, they just take your plane. Probably have no pilots out there to fly it. So they just towed it off to a tow yard. All right. So that's going to be the end. We've reached the conclusion of the Saturday Grab Bag here on the American Radicals podcast. But I will not leave you without a palate cleanse and without a biblical worldview. And I'm going to go for our biblical worldview first to Proverbs chapter 10, verse 9. "Whoever walks in integrity walks securely, but whoever takes crooked paths will be found out." We're back to being honest, out to the bugaboo. I don't care if you're the media lying about groupthink or about how we should talk about the Holocaust. And we really shouldn't look at the truth. It's getting in the way of getting things done. Or if you're a judge who's going to stand in the gap against a president because he's mean, orange, and literally Hitler. Meanwhile, you're forcing the government to give money to your organization, which in effect gives money to you. If you're an organization that is taking some of the $3 billion to fight for the homeless, meanwhile, you're just taking that money and going out and arguing on behalf of freeing Palestine, or the sun monsters out there, or moms at school board meetings are really the terrorists. Hospitals, they're saying, well, we're just going to have to give up on treating the broken legs because you really just want to profit off of murdering babies. If you're Illinois, saying you want to die with dignity. There is no death with dignity. It's all lies. It's all being dishonest. It's all going to be punished. It will be found out. It's a crooked path. All right. And now to the palate cleanse. This might be a little bit crooked because I'm not totally convinced it's not artificial intelligence, but it's funny nonetheless. And my kiddos, they really like this show that's on Netflix, which I got problems with because it seems like everybody in it is a member of the LGBTQIA2S_# plus Rainbow Kamikaze Brigade. And that is this, is it cake? But it's still an interesting concept where they're out there taking cakes and seeing if it's actually made a cake or if it's the real object that it's supposed to be simulating. Well, according to this one, you can freak out your own pet by making a cake look like the pet and then cutting into it with a cake knife. It's kind of creepy, but it's also kind of funny.
All right, let's see how this guy tastes. First cut right. Oh my gosh! Bruno, it's just cake, buddy. So, jetzt schneiden wir dich einmal in der Mitte durch. Ready? Here we go. He thought it was real. It's cake, not you, silly.
All right, let's get a slice of this little guy.
Whoa! Hey! Ow! Okay. Easy, buddy. It's just a cake. Hey, real cat. You're okay. Look, see? It's not you. Hey, buddy, stay with me. Okay, I got you. Easy. You're all right.
That's mean to do to your pets, even if they're actually artificial intelligence. All right, guys, we're done for the day here on the Saturday Grab Bag of the American Radicals podcast. Reminder, if you haven't already, make sure you give us a nice thumbs up, follow, subscribe. You're tracking with us on rumble.com/amradpod or on YouTube at the American Radicals podcast. If you're on one, go to the other. Double up. Give us a nice thumbs up there. Give us a 5-star rating and review. If you listen to us in the audio format, give us a share at X America News. Plan to be back with you Tuesday, 10:30 Eastern time, guys. And until then, have a great weekend.
You've been listening to the voice of the Suspendables on the American Radicals podcast. Follow us on rumble.com/amradpod.